Caden and Augustine have been best friends when they were babies. Caden's mother worked as a maid in Augustine's family home, and due to both boys being born in the same year, they grew up side by side, inseparable. Augustine's parents even warmly embraced Caden as their own. They always did everything together, went to the same school, were in the same class, and had the same friend group. At a party one night, they all decided to play spin the bottle. The rules were simple: whoever the bottle pointed to had to kiss the person who spun it. When it was Caden's turn, he spun the bottle, and it landed on Augustine. A mix of nerves and flustered emotions washed over Caden at the prospect of kissing his best friend. Caden had harbored feelings for Augustine for a long time, but chose to keep them hidden, resigned to the reality of unrequited love. He understood that being with Augustine was impossible, as Augustine only had eyes for girls. Augustine's constant talk about girls and his regular dates with them, often ending in them going back to his room, served as a constant reminder for Caden. Despite the pain, Caden pretended to be unaffected, concealing his true emotions. Augustine even encourages him to explore his youth by setting him up on dates with girls. However, Caden, knowing his own heart, always declined. When the bottle pointed to Augustine, signaling that he and Caden had to kiss, Caden felt a surge of nerves, desperately searching for a way out of the situation. However, Augustine just said that it was just a kiss and not a big deal. As Augustine leaned in and kissed him with tight lips, indicating his reluctance, Caden found himself carried away and reciprocated by opening his mouth. Augustine promptly pulled back and returned to his seat. The teasing from their friends ensued, questioning if they were lovers or brothers. After the party, on their way home, Augustine jokingly remarked, "You know, it was just a game, no need to take it so seriously." As Caden was about to speak, Augustine swiftly intercepted, as if he could anticipate Caden's thoughts or words. "Whoever gets home last loses. The loser has to do the winner's homework." With that, Augustine dashed off. But Caden remained where he was. Caden was on the verge of confessing his love to Augustine. Despite being accustomed to his unrequited feelings and keeping them hidden, there were moments when he felt the urge to unburden himself. Today was one of those days. Occasionally, he couldn't shake the feeling that Augustine might be aware of his affection. Caden and Augustine were always together at school. Since they both got to high school, being with Augustine all the time was hard. Augustine's constant flirting with girls made it difficult for Caden, who had to endure watching from the sidelines. Despite Augustine's preoccupation with girls, he insisted that Caden remain by his side, even when he was occupied with them. The only opportunity Caden had to spend quality time alone with Augustine was on Sundays, when Augustine stayed home all day, avoiding dates. They spend the entire day together in Augustine's empty house, as Augustine's parents were often absent, and Caden's mother left to spend time with Caden's father after finishing her chores. Caden cherished these moments, but now, it seemed like this precious day might no longer be an option. On one of those Sundays, Caden carefully selected an outfit for their outing. He and Augustine had planned to watch a new movie together, just the two of them. With excitement, Caden descended the stairs, only to discover Augustine accompanied by two other girls from school. One was Augustine's latest girlfriend, whom Caden knew would likely change within a week, and the other girl was unfamiliar to Caden. Disappointed, Caden approached Augustine and asked why the girls were present, as he had thought it would just be the two of them for the movie. Augustine casually explained that it was their original plan until his girlfriend called, expressing her boredom at home, prompting him to invite her along. Visibly annoyed, Caden retreated to his room, and Augustine followed suit. Augustine inquired if Caden was upset, to which Caden retorted, "You promised it would just be us. Did you have to bring your girlfriend?" Augustine defended himself, explaining that he couldn't ignore her call and anticipated Caden feeling like a third wheel, so he invited her friend to accompany them, noting that she was single. Caden snapped, frustration evident in his tone. "Enough. I've made it clear I don't want you setting me up with other girls." Taken aback by Caden's sudden outburst, Augustine responded softly, "You don't have to be this angry." Caden then uttered, "You know I'm not into girls, and you know how I feel about you, don't you?" Augustine's expression betrayed his awareness of Caden's feelings. Without awaiting a response, Caden continued, "You don't need to say anything. I can tell by your face. Please leave." Augustine offered, "If you don't want to join them, we can still go to the movie, just the two of us." Caden replied, "I don't care anymore," then firmly pushed Augustine out, locking the door behind him. Augustine opted out of the movie outing and instead drove his girlfriend and her friend home. Upon returning, he attempted to knock on Caden's door, but receiving no response, he heard sobs emanating from within. Augustine ceased knocking, retreating to his own room. The next morning, Augustine, ready for school, went to summon Caden, as they typically went together, only to find Caden's room vacant. He approached Caden's mother to inquire about his whereabouts, and she informed him that Caden had already left. Augustine hurried outside and spotted Caden on his way. Rushing to catch up, he questioned, "Why didn't you wait for me?" Caden remained silent, continuing to walk without responding. Augustine noticed Caden's red and puffy eyes and inquired, "Did you cry?" Caden responded with a glare, momentarily silencing Augustine, before he continued, "Should we go watch the movie this Saturday?" Caden curtly replied, "I don't want to," and quickened his pace, prompting Augustine to hurry to catch up with him. In the following days, Augustine chose to act as if Caden's confession had never occurred. He maintained their usual dynamic, treating Caden like a brother. While Caden resented this pretense, he also desired to preserve their friendship, accepting Augustine's behavior despite his inner turmoil. One day, on the way home from school, a passing motorcyclist accidentally splashed water from a puddle onto Caden. Without hesitation, Augustine moved to confront the motorcyclist, assuming he would flee without apologizing. However, the motorcyclist promptly turned back and dismounted. He sincerely apologized to Caden and offered to purchase new clothes for him to change into. Initially refusing, Caden insisted it was fine and that he was heading home anyway. The motorcyclist persisted, and Caden reluctantly agreed to accept his offer. As they made their way to a nearby mall, Augustine tagged along behind. Along the route, the motorcyclist introduced himself as George and inquired about Caden's name. Before Caden could respond, Augustine interjected, stating, "You don't need to know that. It's none of your business." Ignoring Augustine's remark, Caden proceeded to share his name with George. After purchasing the clothes, as George prepared to depart, he asked Caden for his contact information. Once more, Augustine interjected, saying, "He doesn't share his contact with strangers." Despite Augustine's objection, Caden ignored him and exchanged contact information with George, who expressed his gratitude before leaving. Augustine inquired why Caden had given out his contact information. Caden retorted, "Why do you care?" and hastened his pace. Caden's behavior shifted noticeably as he became engrossed in his phone, often smiling and texting, no longer as tethered to Augustine as before. He consistently declined Augustine's invitations to hang out together. Curiosity getting the better of him, Augustine peeked at Caden's phone and discovered that the person Caden frequently conversed with was George. Despite his knowledge, Augustine confronted Caden, asking about the individual who had seemingly replaced their usual companionship. Caden curtly responded, "None of your business," before walking away. As Caden left his bag with his phone downstairs to retrieve his forgotten watch, Augustine, who was nearby, answered the ringing phone. It was George on the line, and assuming it was Caden, he said, "Are you coming today? The motorbike you wanted to ride has been taken by my cousin, so will you be okay riding another one?" Just then, Caden returned and quickly grabbed the phone from Augustine, questioning, "Why did you answer my call?" Augustine also inquired, "Are you going out?" Caden replied bluntly, "Isn't it obvious?" Augustine then inquired, "Since when did you start riding motorbikes? You never even learned to ride a bicycle because you were scared." Caden retorted, "Don't you have a date to go to? Why are you suddenly all up in my business these days?" Augustine defended himself, saying, "I just want to know what you are up to these days, is that wrong?" Caden remained silent, grabbing his bag and preparing to leave without responding. As Augustine began following him, Caden turned around and said, "I hope you're not following me." Augustine responded, I am, and the only way to get me to stop is if you stay back and don't go anymore. Caden swiftly rushed out and locked the door behind him. However, Augustine quickly leaped through the window, pursuing Caden to the location where he was meeting George. When George noticed Augustine with Caden, he silently questioned Caden with his eyes. Caden responded, "Just ignore him." George then proceeded to show Caden his collection of motorbikes, eventually taking him on a ride with his favorite one. Meanwhile, Augustine grew weary of waiting for Caden and decided to rest for a while. It was at that moment he witnessed Caden and George departing on the motorcycle. As the clouds darkened and the air grew heavy, it was evident that rain was imminent. Caden initially intended to leave Augustine behind, planning to return with George. However, upon noticing the imminent downpour, he had a change of heart and requested George to take them back. When George inquired about the sudden change of plans, Caden explained that Augustine had a tendency to fall sick when it rained, even if he wasn't directly exposed to the rain, and he never carried an umbrella. Understanding Caden's concern, George agreed to take them back to where they had left Augustine. As they arrived, rain began to fall. Caden hurried over to Augustine, opening his umbrella and sheltering him from the downpour. Augustine remarked, "I thought you left me." Caden admitted, "I did." Augustine questioned, "Then why are you back?" Caden responded bluntly, "I don't want to take care of you when you fall sick." Augustine replied, "But I want you to take care of me. If I get soaked in this rain and fall sick, you'll care about me, right? Lately, it feels like you don't care about me like you used to." Caden sternly said, "Just stay quietly under the umbrella. You're going to fall sick anyway." Augustine stepped out from under the umbrella into the rain, expressing, "I miss you taking care of me." Caden anxiously shouted for him to return under the umbrella, but Augustine ignored his pleas and dashed into the rain. Despite Caden's efforts to catch up, Augustine eluded him. Caden refrained from seeking George's assistance, knowing the risks of riding a motorbike in the rain. Instead, he hailed a taxi and searched frantically as they drove, but Augustine was nowhere to be found. Upon reaching home, Caden anxiously awaited Augustine's return. An hour later, he spotted Augustine on the door monitor and rushed to open the door. As soon as Augustine entered, he collapsed into Caden's arms. With the assistance of his mother, Caden carried Augustine to his room, drying him off and changing his clothes. He then administered the medicine Augustine typically took when he fell ill during rainy weather. Caden remained by Augustine's side until he regained consciousness. Augustine smiled as he observed Caden dozing off beside him. Augustine lightly tapped Caden, and in his half-asleep state, Caden murmured, "You're awake." Augustine asked, "Do you want to sleep with me tonight?" Caden suddenly became fully awake, standing up and asking, "What do you mean by sleep with you?" Augustine chuckled, "You have a dirty mind, my friend. I just want you to stay here with me for the night. You know how I am on rainy nights." The word friend felt like a stab to Caden's heart. Without saying anything in response, he grabbed a blanket and laid it on the floor to sleep. The following morning, the first thing Caden did was check Augustine's temperature. He had been unable to sleep the entire night as Augustine's fever continued to rise, requiring Caden to constantly tend to him to keep it under control. As he was leaving, Augustine jokingly suggested, "Since you spent the night in my room, should we take a shower together?" Caden responded, "I'm not in the mood to play with you this morning." As Caden turned to leave, Augustine impulsively pulled his shorts down, remarking, "We used to shower together, and I've seen everything. Why are you shy now?" Caden slowly pulled his shorts back up, tears welling in his eyes. He confronted Augustine, asking, "Are you having fun?" Augustine was left speechless, caught off guard by Caden's reaction. Before he could gather his thoughts, Caden walked away. After showering, Augustine searched the entire house, but Caden was nowhere to be found. He attempted to call Caden, but his phone was off. Augustine waited anxiously throughout the day, but as night approached and Caden still hadn't returned, Augustine grew increasingly concerned. It was almost midnight, and Caden's absence was highly unusual. Augustine made the decision to wait outside on the porch, hoping for Caden's safe return. Minutes later, Caden finally returned home. Upon seeing Augustine sitting outside in the cold, he rushed over, concerned. Caden questioned why Augustine was outside while he was still sick. Augustine replied, "I was waiting for you." Perplexed, Caden asked, "Why would you wait for me in the cold?" Augustine admitted, "Your phone was off, and I was worried. I'm glad you're back safely. Let's go inside." With that, Augustine reached for Caden's hand, but Caden pulled away slowly, tears welling in his eyes. He asked, "Why are you doing this to me?" Augustine remained silent as Caden continued, "I like you." Augustine continued to ignore Caden's confession and urged, "It's getting cold outside. Let's go in." Undeterred, Caden repeated, "I said I like you." Ignoring Caden's words once again, Augustine inquired, "Are you hungry? Did you eat?" Tears streamed down Caden's face as he expressed his frustration. "I told you that I like you. Why aren't you saying anything? Why are you always doing this? Why are you ignoring my feelings? I know that you will never like me back, but I would feel better if you rejected me rather than ignoring my feelings for you. Do you know how much it hurts?" Augustine tenderly wiped away Caden's tears and enveloped him in a hug without uttering a word. Caden remained in Augustine's embrace for some time, releasing his emotions through tears. Augustine discreetly wiped away a tear of his own. Once Caden had finished crying, they silently made their way back inside to their respective rooms. In the following days, Augustine reverted to his usual demeanor, acting as if nothing had occurred between them. Caden, too, mirrored this behavior, choosing to bury his feelings for Augustine. He had resolved to move on from his romantic emotions, hoping for their relationship to return to its former state. However, despite their attempts to pretend, the dynamic between them had shifted irreversibly. Although Caden hadn't seen Augustine with another girl in a while, it no longer held significance for him. He had made the conscious decision to let go of his feelings for Augustine. This continued until one night when Augustine took Caden to a karaoke booth. When Caden questioned why they were there, Augustine explained, "I know you love to sing, but you can't sing out loud at home like you want to. This is the perfect place for you to do that." Caden smiled faintly, selecting a song and beginning to sing. Midway through his singing, Augustine unexpectedly kissed him. Caden reacted with anger, pushing Augustine away and demanding an explanation. Augustine stood there with his head down, confessing, "I think there is something wrong with me." Caden responded curtly, "I also think there is something wrong with you." Augustine then asked, "Do you still like me?" Annoyed by the question, Caden retorted, "Why would you bring that up now?" Augustine persisted, admitting, "I think I'm in love with you." Caden shook his head, stating firmly, "There is definitely something wrong with you. Listen, I don't like you anymore. I've already moved on." Augustine persisted, asking, "Is there any chance that you still have some little feelings left for me?" Caden, still annoyed, snapped back, "What is wrong with you? Why are you doing this? I don't have even a single drop of feelings left for you, so deal with whatever it is that is wrong with you." Just then, Augustine received a call from a girl whose name was saved with love emojis. Seeing the name, Caden became enraged and stormed out of the booth. Left alone, Augustine broke down silently, tears streaming down his face. Caden dialed George's number and swiftly. In just a few minutes, George arrived on his motorcycle to pick him up. George's house had become Caden's sanctuary, a place he sought refuge whenever he needed to escape from Augustine's presence. Caden had confided in George about his unreciprocated feelings, and George had always been there to provide comfort and support. Despite the short duration of their acquaintance, they had formed a close friendship. George took Caden to his house as requested. Knowing that Caden only sought refuge at his house when he had issues with Augustine, George inquired, "What did he do this time?" Caden revealed, "He said he's in love with me." George questioned, "Isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't you be happy?" Caden sighed, responding, "I would be happy if he hadn't completely ignored my feelings before. Plus, I overheard him asking someone what to do when someone you only see as a friend confesses their feelings to you. I'm sure he only said he's in love with me because he feels bad for me. That's just playing with my feelings." George inquired, "Did you ask him the reason why he suddenly told you he's in love with you?" Caden retorted, I don't have to. I already know. George countered, you know, proper communication is everything. Things aren't always what they seem to be. You should have asked him instead of jumping to conclusions. Caden shrugged off George's advice, stating, whatever, I don't want to see him now. George responded firmly, I'm not giving up my bed for you today, so you better go back home. Caden protested, you always tell me to stay for as long as I want. Why are you kicking me out today? George shook his head and retreated to his room. Since school was on break, Caden decided to stay at George's place for a few days. He informed his mom of his whereabouts to ease her worries, but instructed her not to tell Augustine. As George prepared to leave, he instructed Caden to close the door behind him. Just as George stepped out and Caden moved to shut the door, Augustine unexpectedly appeared. Caden questioned how Augustine knew he was there and if his mom had informed him of his whereabouts. George popped his head back in, wearing a smile, and declared, I told him, you two need to talk. With that, George pushed Augustine inside and firmly closed the door behind him. With an awkward wave, Augustine greeted Caden with a hesitant hi. Caden inquired, what are you doing here? Augustine explained, I was worried because I didn't know where you were, but now that I see you're doing fine, I'm okay. I'll leave if you want me to. Just as Augustine turned to go, Caden stopped him with a pressing question. Why did you ignore my feelings, and then suddenly tell me that you love me? Augustine responded, saying, I'm sorry. Truthfully, I always knew you had feelings for me, but I wanted us to maintain our friendship the way it was, so I pretended I didn't know. Also, I felt something whenever I was with you, but I didn't pay much attention to it. After that party where we kissed, that feeling grew stronger and stronger. I didn't know what it was. All I knew was that I always wanted to be close to you, and I wanted to kiss you every time you were near me. I wanted to hold you and touch you on every part of your body. I didn't want to be feeling that way towards you. You're my best friend, and a guy. I've only liked girls my whole life, so I didn't understand why I felt that way with you. I didn't want to accept these feelings that wouldn't go away, but instead kept increasing. I didn't want to reject your feelings, but I couldn't bring myself to accept them either, even though I came to understand that I was in love with you. Caden asked, then why did you decide to tell me you love me? Augustine replied earnestly, I got tired of pretending. It felt like I was losing you. I really don't want to lose you, which is why I bravely decided to face who I am and accept that I'm in love with you. Caden stated firmly, but I already told you that I no longer have feelings for you. Augustine's expression fell as he responded, I know, and I understand. I'm late. Caden grinned mischievously and added, maybe I can borrow some of yours. With that, he kissed Augustine. Before Augustine could kiss back, Caden pulled back and remarked, that should be enough for now. Augustine's face lit up with hope as he began, so. However, Caden interrupted, stating, so nothing. You really stressed me out. I'm physically and emotionally drained. I don't have the energy to reciprocate the feeling right now. We'll see about that later. Augustine accepted, saying, it's okay, I deserve that. But for now, can you please come back home? Caden affirmed, I was already planning on coming home today. Augustine then offered to help Caden pack his luggage, but Caden clarified, I don't have any luggage. I came empty-handed and I used George's things. Augustine's face displayed jealousy as he inquired, you two have gotten very close, huh? Caden teased, is that jealousy I smell? You don't have the right to be jealous yet. Augustine admitted, I can't help it. Caden called George to inform him of his departure and promised to teach him a lesson later. As Augustine and Caden prepared to leave, Caden suddenly halted and inquired, wait, what about your girlfriend who called you that night? Augustine swiftly responded, I don't have any girlfriend. I haven't dated anyone for a long time. Caden scoffed skeptically and questioned, are you lying to me? I saw how you saved her name on your phone. Augustine explained, I forgot to delete her number, but I deleted it the moment you left that night. Caden glared at Augustine with suspicion before they both departed. Augustine made every effort to appease Caden, but Caden had already resolved to give Augustine a taste of his own medicine. School resumed, and the moment Augustine stepped in, the girls rushed to him, questioning why he no longer hung out with them. Augustine glanced at Caden, who was glaring at him, then turned back to the girls. He addressed them, saying, "Sorry, but my boyfriend doesn't like that." The girls understood and sadly turned to leave. Caden was surprised by Augustine's use of the word boyfriend. He hadn't expected Augustine to be so open about it. He softened after that without even realizing it. At home, Caden said to Augustine, "I heard you got a boyfriend. Who is he?" Augustine replied, "He is right in front of me." Caden asked, "When did I accept to be your boyfriend?" Augustine replied, "When are you going to accept?" Caden questioned, "What are you going to do if I don't accept?" Augustine playfully responded, "I will," as he moved forward and began tickling Caden. Caden retaliated by tickling him back, and amidst their laughter and attempts to escape the tickles, they both fell onto the couch, with Augustine ending up on top of Caden. The laughter ceased as Augustine gazed into Caden's eyes. He then confessed, "I love you. I'm going to say that to you every day until you get tired of me. I'll say it even if you do." Caden relented, "Okay, fine, I accept to be your boyfriend. Now, stop being cheesy." Augustine's gaze shifted to Caden's lips as he said, "I'm going to kiss you now." Caden wrapped his arms around Augustine's neck, saying, "What are you waiting for?" before pulling him in for a kiss. As they kissed, Augustine pulled back and whispered, "What if I want to do something more than kissing?" Caden swiftly pulled him back by the neck, urging, "Just shut up," before kissing him again. Lost in the moment, their lips met fervently, their tongues intertwining in a passionate dance. Suddenly, Augustine pulled back once more. He murmured, "Wait, we can't do it here. This is the living room." Caden pushed Augustine away as he said, "Just forget it." As Caden moved to walk away, Augustine intercepted him, sweeping him up into his arms. With a grin, Augustine teased, "Are you sure you don't want to do it anymore?" Caden responded by wrapping his legs around Augustine's waist and his arms around his neck, pulling him closer. They resumed kissing passionately as they ascended the stairs, bumping into things along the way. Upon reaching Augustine's room, he tossed Caden onto the bed before swiftly locking the door. The boys decided to come out to their parents about their relationship. Initially, Caden's mom was hesitant due to their different statuses in the house. However, when Augustine's parents accepted their relationship without any issues, Caden's mom eventually came around and accepted it as well. Augustine openly displayed their relationship, and Caden was happy that his love was no longer unrequited.